Welcome to another episode of High Performance Business and Habit Building. I'm your host, Leah Fish, founder of CEO Rise, and I am so excited to be speaking today with Sandra Chuma. Sandra, hello.
Hello, Leah. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. In fact, we were talking right before the show, and I said to Sandra, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! We have to let the listeners hear this. This is so amazing." So, Sandra, you were sharing with me that you actually grew up. I mean, your story is kind of really the American, or should I say, since you're in Canada, the North American dream. You grew up, in a mud hut, and now you're making more than seven figures. I'm sure it was quite a long journey, but give us a snippet of the story.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, as I said. And in terms of my story, I never know where to start and but to the point that you asked, I was born in Zimbabwe, which at the time that I was born is Rhodesia. And for anybody who's like, where is that? I have no idea. That's okay. No shade, no shame. It is in Southern Africa. And so our neighbor that most people know of is South Africa. So we're just north of South Africa. And in growing up, I was raised, as I said, in a mud hut. I literally was born and raised in a mud hut, no running water, no electricity. And in growing up, the dream was to go to school because it's a huge deal, when you're growing up in a country where it's very difficult to get education, and also where there sometimes isn't the opportunity for various reasons. And so for me growing up, the dream was to go to school. That's what I was raised by my mom and dad, but also a huge part of my growing up was my grandparents. And both my grandmothers never went to school. So neither one of them had an education. My one grandmother, my paternal grandmother, never worked, had a formal job, kind of, sold this and that, grew crops, and that's how she made her living. My maternal grandmother worked. She worked as a housemaid for all of her life. And so for both of them, that was the dream that they spoke into me was, oh my gosh, for you to just go to school. That was the dream. And my maternal grandmother, because she worked for as a housemaid for a white family in an upper middle class neighborhood. Sometimes she would take me to work with her on her half day was Saturdays. And so on Saturdays, sometimes she'd take me and we'd go on the bus. And when we're on the bus, she'd be pointing out like these beautiful houses, like these beautiful homes with gardens and cars out front. And she'd say to me, one day you're going to live in a house like that. One day you're gonna have a car. One day, so for me, it kind of was, for lack of a better way, she was my first, I guess, motivational speaker because I grew up believing that one day I would have that life. It
Oh,
obviously wasn't easy, and it takes a village, but I did fortunately get to one day go to school, one day, go to university, go to college, graduate with a degree, and then go on to have a successful career in management consulting. And in that career, I rose up the ranks very quickly. And it was always this dream that, I'm gonna have this house that my grandma said I'd have. Got there and thought that, oh, when I get there, that's when I'll be happy. If I can just get to this house and have this car and, did that, wasn't happy. I mean, of course, it was great. It checked off the box, yay, all of that.
right.
But I really didn't feel happy. And so then it became this continual chasing game of if I could just make it to be a manager, if I could just make it to be a director, if I could just make $100,000, if I could just, and there were all these goalposts, and I check off each achievement,
Mm.
still didn't feel happy. And I thought, oh, you know what? Maybe it's because I work for somebody else. I work for companies. What if I created my own company and had freedom of being a business owner? Then I'll be happy. Created my company and very quickly made six figures and relatively within a few years had my first seven-figure year. I'll be happy when I have seven figures, right? When I can say I have a seven-figure company. I wasn't. And so then it led to this continual, the next and the next, because the next would be where I would be happy. And it
Mm.
was in all of that that I got to building an 8-figure company. And in the process, burnt myself out. Ended up being diagnosed with adrenal fatigue. I was depressed. My marriage was in trouble. And it was really, it's the greatest gift I've ever been given. I think having that breakdown and then having to really sit with myself, sitting in the doctor's office and the doctor telling me, you have the highest stress response of anybody I've ever treated, was
Oh, wow.
a massive wake up call for me. And that was really the beginning of me going on a journey, because I used to be one of these people who turned my nose up at personal development. Like, why would you need to go to somebody else to tell you how to live your life? Like, you can't figure it out for yourself. But I was humbled and had to
Mm.
go look for help. And it was in that process that I feel like I finally found me, and I finally found what it is that makes me happy.
Mm. And I mean, all of those parts are also, I think, so much about the dream is, you know, because the dream is never, we think of the dream as this compressed, like from a mud hut to, 7 figures. But of course, the even better dream is the heroine's journey, unfortunately, but that's what movies are made of, right? Is the burnt out in the doctor's room, highest stress response I've ever seen, Sandra, and having a wake up call and going on an eat, pray, love journey, or whatever. That's really the juice.
Isn't that sad though, that that's how, like, for most of us, we change, or we're forced to change in the depths of despair. And I wish that it didn't have to be that way, that, we didn't have to wait till we're on our knees, which literally I was, like, on my bathroom floor, just sobbing my heart out, because I achieved all the things on
You
paper.
did what you were supposed to do.
My life was, it was even like, I often think about, my grandmother passed away, and unfortunately before she could really see the success, really see me create the success. And it's the one thing, like, I've always wondered, like, if she could be here and see, like, to be like, this is the house you live in, like, this is the car you employ people, like, her mind would have been blown, because I think even
Mm.
when she spoke into me the big dream, this, it was so far beyond what she could have dreamt from where she was. But it was in checking off these boxes and thinking, that's when I'll be happy when. So we live in this constant state of deferred happiness. I'll be happy when I have, and when I, achieve this and that. And I went on that journey, and even going back to school, when I thought maybe it's because I didn't get an Ivy League education. If I could just get an Ivy, like, that's how, like, messed up
But
my
what's so
thinking was.
interesting is, yeah, it's I know that just pushing the just can down the road, as it were, right?
Yeah.
But what's so interesting to me is that, the dream, in air quotes, was education. And then when you actually did go back and just get an Ivy League education, it didn't do it,
It
right?
wasn't the answer. And here's actually, if you ask me, okay, so what was the answer and how did you figure it out? It actually went back to something that my father said to me, growing up. So as from literally as long as I can remember, have understanding, my father would always say to me, there's, your success, even when you're successful, when you get to be successful, your success won't have any meaning unless you take others with you, unless you bring others with you, unless you use your life to help others rise. And, when you're in the treadmill of, more and more and next and
Yeah.
next, I was just thinking about me, like, if I could just earn more money, if I could just have that, if I could just have, and I wasn't really thinking about what was the bigger impact of my life, what was the bigger purpose. And I used to think as well, I think that purpose was about being, Mother Teresa, like, on a global platform, and you're making massive change and solving world hunger. And what I realize now, in hindsight, going back to my father's words, is that as long as you're doing something, first of all, that it can't just be about others, because there's a danger in that too, where sometimes, we're so focused on others and helping others to our own detriment. And so,
Absolutely.
what my father would say to me is it's about you being successful, it's about you helping others be successful because it's about all of us. And he would
Yes.
often remind me there's a word in our language, in my mother tongue, in the Ubuntu languages, which are spoken in Southern Africa, and it's Ubuntu. And that's Ubuntu, Ubuntu. And it speaks to, like, there's no direct translation per se. It speaks more to a philosophy. And that philosophy really speaks to it should, when you do anything, it should be for me, for you, for us. And Ubuntu really speaks to our shared humanity, our shared, the fact that when you hurt, I hurt, that my success is your success. And I think oftentimes we forget that, especially in the world that we live in that's very me focused. And it came back to that I had to sit with, okay, what was the meaning of my life? What was purpose? We all like hear people, what's my purpose? What was my purpose? And the realization I had for me was that I was being called on, and all of the things that I had done to really step into helping other people realize what I had realized, that joy isn't about the stuff. It's never about the stuff. That our dreams are never about what we think they are. That it's not about the house, the car, the money. That our dreams and our joy about how we think they'll make us feel. Like,
Yeah.
what is it we want to feel? And so that for me was the journey, and what has now become the work that I do a lot of, which is helping other women find their joy and also find their purpose and their worth, because that was something that I struggled with. Was I thought my worthiness came from doing, right, from having. If I had the car, then that meant that something about me. Was understanding that you're inherently worthy.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so interesting that, you're one of a few successful entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs that I've interviewed who got very quickly in different iterations, kind of went to the top, seven, six figures, seven figure, eight figures, and burnt out because there was something sort of their humanity missing. There is nothing more life-giving than being able to actually, rather, a phrase sort of came to me while I was listening to you, that rather than upgrade, it's integrate, and that's really the thing. Because if you're shooting to the stars but there's no foundation, well, that's not going to work out very long. That is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me that, as I'm sort of taking, hopefully, it's slow going, but I'm getting there. My work into universities and companies to create, you know,
Oh, let's pause on that.
oh,
Power of our words. There's You're doing it. You're
yes,
doing
you're
it,
right. You're
you
right.
know?
You're right. Thank you, Coach. Yes, I am. So as I am bringing my work into universities and companies, and it's so funny because one of my clients is an executive coach, and for companies, not just tech companies, but companies in Seattle, that are based in Seattle, but that are international, national, and national. But her work is about communication and how important courageous conversations and good communication is between the team. And that is a very, let's say, emotional, intelligent kind of thing that is not typically represented. And a lot of the burnout that I see, and this is something that she and I are working with, is the, you know, the drain that not being able to express yourself, or to even know what it is you want to express. Like, that's not the thing, but you're like, oh, and so that repression, whether it's chosen or not chosen, right? I see as such a massive taxing drain on people. And especially, you know, of course, in the entire LGBTQIA plus, I see it more on the female energy side, because expressing ourselves, our listeners can't see you, but you are wearing colors, you have paintings, you have beautiful flowers and books of all different, our expression is so much an important part of our lives. And not being able to express ourselves, not even having the tools. In a way, your grandmother gave you those tools, and your father gave you the tool as well, but it sounds like you didn't really even know what that meant. What was the to do with that tool, right? And that's something that I really see. And burnout is a huge cause of attrition, of emergency sabbaticals, of people quitting, and it's so surprising to me. It's such a basic kind of business move to bring people like you in, well, as you are now, of supporting people and that kind of thing, to support people to not burn out. It's so basic, and yet it's kind of like that Ubuntu, that it's people are like, well, what does that entail? What do you mean? I don't know. We'll just like examine productivity markers.
Yeah.
And it
Yes.
shows that it doesn't work.
You know, that's so fascinating that you say that, and it's so true. Is that as a strategy, if you think about it from corporations, I worked in corporate for a really long time, and it's almost like a badge of honor, right? Who can
Yeah.
work the hardest, right? Who can work Monday to Sunday and be in the office first and be in the office last? And yet, when you think about how counterproductive that is, that as a culture, as a society, that's such a big shift that we need to make, where we've glorified hustle, right? We've glorified the grind. Like if you think about it, it's like, yeah, if you don't have success, it's because you're not grinding. That's the messaging that we've given. And then as people, we hear that. And then as a manager, I've been a manager too, and it's kind of, you're looking at, oh, this person's a slacker because they're not there like 15 hours a day and working, answering emails at 10 o'clock at night. And
Mm.
yet, gosh, like how counterproductive, because how productive can you be? How much space do you even have in your head to be creative when you're just grinding all of the
Yeah.
time? And I feel, you talked about the masculine and the masculine and feminine energies, and we're so much in the masculine, and we, as a culture, as society, I feel like this is such an important crossroad that we're at, to have those conversations that, especially for us as women, we've been told, like for me, when I was in corporate, it was a bad thing to say you were tired. It was a bad thing to be emotional, even not in a, oh, let me just boo-hoo all the time, but just to say how you felt. You repressed everything, kept everything in, didn't say anything, and you,
Yeah.
you towed the party line. So I feel like us, especially as women, I feel like this is an opportunity for us to step into leadership, in the sense of helping. How do we have these conversations to say rest is an important part of a strategy, right? Because like you
100%.
said, if we're burning our people out and we're churning through people, how in the long term is that productive?
Totally. And it's so interesting how these sort of things are wired into our cultures. And I don't know what it was like, in Zimbabwe. My kind of my guess is that it's not like that, right? My guess is that it's a different style, and that people, like you said, it takes a village. My husband is Colombian from South America, and um, as I was listening to you, I was thinking of this story that happened. I actually think I'm a fantastic receiver. People are, it's like, so you don't get up. I'm like, people want to help. I don't need to get up. Like I'm very good at that. But this receptionist really caught me off guard one time. We were there in May, and I was bringing the laundry down the stairs to wash the laundry. We were staying in an apartment building, and as I went down the stairs, the receptionist said to me, "Can I help you?" And I was like, "We didn't have much laundry. We're on vacation. What?" I was like, "Oh no, that's okay." And he kind of like ran after me, and he was like, "I have a question, if I may." I said, sure, what? And he said, why do American women, he was like, no, why do Americans never want help? And
Oh,
it like, I almost dropped I was so, it was like my jaw dropped. I was frozen. I just stared at him and he was like, I'm sorry, is that rude? And I was like, and I was like thinking, well, because of our puritanical culture that says you must do everything yourself, never accept,
yeah.
and it was so ironic because so much of what I teach is about very much that Ubuntu of supporting the collective and that we cannot rise alone and all of these things. And there he was reflecting that to me. It was a real,
Isn't
and I said, wow,
that
because and in Colombia, and I don't know again if it's the same in where you're from, but everyone is helping everyone all the time. My husband's friends that he grew up with, his best friend buys fish for his father and it brings it to him. I mean, just they all help each other all the time. That is woven into the culture. And as someone who specializes from my own experience ongoing with depression and anxiety for much of my life, and as something that I've also researched and support, neurodiverse, but specifically neurodivergent entrepreneurs, is that, um, I really do believe from all the things you're talking about that these are just, such obvious examples why the United States, you're in Canada, but the United States, over 46 million people are diagnosed. I've never even been diagnosed, right? Diagnosed with mental health disorders because the culture, or as I say, the lack of culture, is really glorifying, like you're saying, we're really glorifying, kind of like who can go the longest and the hardest without burning out. And when you burn out, well, now you've got that badge of glory.
Yeah. Isn't that sad? Like if you think about when you ask people nowadays, how are you? Somewhere very quickly in that conversation is how busy they are. Like it's a badge of honor to say, I am so busy, And it's sad that we're so busy. And yet when you think about our lives now, we have so many things that should make our lives easier and give us more time, right? We have dishwashers and washing machines and all of these things,
And
and yet we're busier.
what do
Like
we do
people,
with all that extra time?
so what are we doing with all of this extra time? But to the point that you said is that as a culture, we very much, and it's unfortunate too with what's happened over the last few years with the pandemic and people having to insulate more,
Yeah,
is that we've become very, I've got to figure it out myself. And if you have to ask for help, it's almost like weakness, right? We now view that as weakness. Whereas when I look at, in Zimbabwe, and unfortunately, things are changing because we're very influenced by Western culture, right?
of
So
course.
now
Yeah.
we want to be like, the
Eating
Western
potato
world.
chips.
Exactly. But when I look at, when I was growing up, or when you take it to like the villages where they're not really influenced by all of the stuff, it really is a collective. When it comes to harvest time, someone will go and help somebody else in their field because they didn't, or they will loan them their cow, or all of these things. It literally is, as I said, a village. Like even in my language, there's no word for a cousin. That doesn't exist because in our culture, everybody is a brother and a sister. We all
Mhm.
look out for each other. And so,
Wow.
yeah, you're right that nowadays we've become very I, and we don't think about the greater, that it's a we versus just an I.
Well, and it leads to the, I'm burnt out. Like it's just that those are kind of, I really do see that as like those are the two choices, is like it does it because there's just so many examples. And that's something we talk about with my husband, that in Colombia, unfortunately, there's 31 million people living in poverty right now.
Mhm.
And I'm very proud we've started a charity to help with like food security in Cartagena, Colombia, where he's from. But when I ask him the things that I and so many of my colleagues and friends have experienced in our lives of, you know, relatively entitled people, even if, by American standards, not super wealthy or like that. But I say, do people experience this, this loneliness? And of course you can't, but overall, I mean, he knows a lot of people. He worked in the hotel industry for 18 years. And he said, it wasn't, I mean, of course there's a whole drug cartel and all that, but it wasn't really the visiting Colombians who were going hard at the alcohol and the drugs and the whatever when they would be at a wedding. It was pretty much the well, some other cultures too, but he always said, the North Americans always wanted to go, the Americans particularly, like as hard as they could. You know what I mean? Like they were just so extreme. And I think to me that it's sort of like waving a flag of desperation in a way that we're just so looking for that thing. As you were saying, you were searching and searching, what will make me happy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's not, and the thing is, the way that I see it is that Ubuntu that you mentioned, that is the hardest work of all, is that slowing down, that resting, that inclusion, that integration there, because there's no dopamine hit for that.
You're right, right? You're so right that there is no quick fix. There is no, and I think the hardest thing too is realizing that it all ultimately comes down to the only person who can make you feel happy is you. And I think culture, I mean, look at the society and culture as a globe, as the globe, not just in terms of America, but globally. We're taught that happiness is outside of ourselves, right? That happiness comes from,
It's
and if you think about
quantifiable. Yeah.
commercialism, right? It's about,
Yeah.
if you just buy this thing, this jeans, this car, this whatever, then you'll be happy, because that's what drives the economy. Because it'd
Sure.
be a very different economy if you're like, you know what, you can just choose to be happy as you are. It's like, oh, and I was listening to
Like,
something the
then
other
what? Yeah.
I know, then what, right? And I was listening to something the other day which said like one of the biggest booming industries in the Western world is storage
Oh,
lockers.
yes. My mother says, why didn't she invest in the beginning with that? It's booming. Yeah.
Because think about how like messed up that is. It's like we have these houses, we buy these houses, then you have to go to the bigger house because you've got so much stuff you can't fit it in the smaller house. You need the bigger house, but then now the stuff doesn't even fit in the bigger house, so now you have to put it in a storage locker.
It's like a cartoon. Yeah. It's like a cartoon. Well, we have to wrap it up here, but give us just a quick, kind of like pulling it down into the practical, just if in a 30 seconds, how would you say that you integrate this into the work that you do, helping people live, the most extraordinary lives?
So for me, and I love that you talked about habits. I think ultimately it comes down to the habits that we create. And the biggest habit that people don't often realize is that our thoughts are habits, right? How you think is a habit. We often think about the doing habits. Do I go to the gym? Do I eat healthy? Those kinds of things. But the way we think, and if we kind of come back to the conversation we've had for this little while, it is choosing, how do I want to think? How do I want to feel? And then understanding that you are not your thoughts. Because oftentimes most people I speak to, and most people when I'm coaching, have never thought about their thoughts or thought about what they think about. And understanding that you are not your thoughts, that you are the thinker of your thoughts, that you can choose. You can choose in this moment to be different, to think a different thought. But so many of us use our thinking to live the past. Like so many of us wake up every day and we think about what happened yesterday, and then we let that rule how we feel today, and then wake up tomorrow and think about what happened yesterday. And so we're
Right.
constantly living in the past. And so it's really understanding that you have the power to choose to think a different thought, and to intentionally create your life. And for me, the biggest thing is helping people understand that you are worthy, that you're worthy to be, to do, to have whatever it is that your heart desires.
I love it so much. And with a Sandra Chuma on every person's shoulder, I think it would be another world indeed. Sandra, thank you so much for this wonderful, colorful, just global, cultural, smart conversation. I think it's really going to be helpful to people. I think bringing your perspective of all that you've gone through to what you help people do on a daily basis in a business that you have chosen that doesn't burn you out is really everything. So thank you so much for being with us today, Sandra Chuma. And I can't wait till our next conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was such a delight.